Welcome to Behind the Play, a video and podcast product of The Hoop Show that explores the lives of Geelong players, past and present, as well as the off-field figures that are keeping us Geelong strong. My name is Paul James, and today I have the opportunity to chat to one of those awesome off-field figures, Mr. Ray Chamberlain. How are you, man?
Well, I'm well, mate, actually. Thank you for asking. How are you?
Very well. We were kind of chatting pre-show there that you've been through a bit the ringer a little bit health-wise lately and had some operations and bits and pieces. So how's the recovery going?
Yeah, look, just battling through, holding on with white knuckles to the end of the season, and I think I've got a birthday coming up, and
happy birthday!
Thank you. And you just do a little bit of a vom in your mouth when you got to, when you're scrolling down to you got to find your year of birth, and it just keeps
it gets
going.
More and more depressing, right?
Yeah, proper. It's like, what are you doing over here? So I turned 47 in September, and so yeah, I think it's just part of 20 years of being involved at AFL level. You get some wear and tear along the way. So that's all that is, mate. But we're hanging on and we're doing okay.
Look, we talk about the players battling through injuries and those sort of things fairly regularly, but the real warriors such as yourself right here. So everyone make sure we take note, because Rose is carrying stuff. I'm sure there's a few others that are carrying little niggles and those sort of things. It's a lot of distance that you cover on any given week.
We've been really fortunate. We've seen this year, we've gone from 3 on the field,
3 to 4.
And that was my whole AFL umpiring experience, was 3 umpires, and it was hard. It was physically very demanding.
Yep.
And we went through different iterations of how that system worked, and that has evolved as player movement and ball movement and congestion, and all of those things have evolved where the game needed to plonk its officials and where it needed to put those resources has evolved. This year we've gone to 4, and I'll hand on heart tell you, I tore my calf 4 times over summer. Ooh. And I wouldn't have got on the ground in round 2 as I did to start the season had it been under a 3 umpire system. So the level of gut run and high intensity sprint has dissipated.
Which is good.
And so the volume has come back as well, as you'd imagine, with an additional resource on the ground. But it's that gut run where you're under the pump for prolonged periods and a long way away from the ball. That's sort of moved as a result of this additional human resource on field. So theoretically, Paul,
prolong the career.
There's that. You should be able to cognitively process better information under less duress, and you would hope that as a result of that, you would get better decision making. But of course, we've got the catch-all, the caveat, which is we're dealing with laws that are subjective.
Yeah, there's a human error component to everything too. There's perspective, it's positioning. Right. There's so many layers and complexities to this whole thing. So it's certainly something I don't necessarily envy you for. I mean, there's so many, I'm sure, amazing qualities of the role, but certainly some of those really heated, contentious moments. I'm sure there's some of those moments where we wish you could just kind of shrink back into the background and
go missing. No doubt, But like with anything in life worth doing, you'll take some bark off. It's not all milkshakes and slaps on the back, right?
Of course.
So it makes the highs. If you don't have that down to that reference point, it's all just 4 to 6 out of 10 on any given day, right? So that's the way I try to view it.
No, and it's a great perspective. And out of interest, just before we got to the 3, going back to the 3 umpire model that you've previously experienced, obviously we see lots of data all the time about kilometres that players are covering and those sort of things. For those listening who perhaps don't have the perspective of what sort of distance yourself and other umpires were covering, especially during that 3 umpire phase, what sort of distance would you find yourself covering on any given game? Of course, there's the different intensities that you've spoken about as well, but in terms of just sheer distance, was that something you would also be tracking as well?
Oh yeah, so and like for like, because you see the stuff on the telly and all that they talk about the tracking. If we look at like for like, and we just look at distance, anywhere, and different umpires have got different styles and different physical capabilities, but it would fall on any given Sunday on any given umpire, the range would be between 13 and 19 Ks. So that would be your total volume prior to going to 4. And as you can imagine, some of that's walking, some of that's low speed. Yeah, it was physically really challenging. And I know myself, I wasn't really doing any quality running in preparation for the next round until my Thursday session,
Yep.
For the Saturday game, let's say. So the rest of it was just like trying to
recover.
It was a real challenge to come up again for the next week. And of course, we're talking about 6 months of that before you get to the start line when the real stuff starts in September,
So I'm sure you probably appreciate, I know sometimes for fans of the game that it can be a little bit a lesser experience when all of a sudden it's stoppage after stoppage after stoppage. But I'm sure for yourselves, when you're covering all those kilometres from time to time, I'm sure there's a moment you go, oh, yeah, I'll let this one play out. They can wrap it up and we'll go again. We'll go again just so that I can continue to suck in a bit more oxygen.
I umpired in a preliminary final. I was talking with a very good friend of mine during the week, last week. And we umpired the 2018 preliminary final that was held over in Perth. Melbourne went over to play West Coast. The game was played at 1 o'clock Perth time, and it was 36 to 38 degrees on the field. And we umpired for 2.5 months at night in Melbourne, and we get dumped over there, and we're running around in that game. And in the last quarter, I'm cramping all sorts of yuck. And Scott Lysette, and I'm trying to think of his name. He's at Hawthorn now, defender. He played at Melbourne. Sam, athletic.
Sam
Frosty, thank you. And they're nose to nose, right? And they're the only players in my end of the ground, and they're just trading verbal barbs with one another. And I've never been happier to see two players not interested in the game, because it meant that I didn't have to squeeze down, because I couldn't move. I was cramping in my calf, my quad, my hamstring. I go, these guys can talk this garbage for as long as they like. So, yeah, I'm happy those days are behind us.
So you just got to wander over and start egging him on at that point, right? I know we can't. I know we can't be seen to be encouraging it, but go on, guys, just keep chirping a little bit longer, all right? I need to remain engaged in this, and you save me covering some distance.
Yeah, they give me a solid.
So actually, I guess honing in on scenarios such as that, when there is a little bit of Barney behind the play or whatever the case happens to be, obviously your core job is to officiate and ensure that the smooth progression of the game. But when someone, whether it's yourself or others, finds themselves caught up in a scenario like this, what does that mean for everyone else who's still, assuming the game is still being played and it hasn't become this gigantic thing that kind of halts the game? What does that do to everyone else who's kind of stuck, quote unquote, with the game itself, has one less resource? We've been talking about a human resource so far. There's one less human resource available because they're caught up with something else entirely.
Yeah, obviously, when it comes to that, we're weighing up a myriad of different factors, and ultimately the primary number one key element is the game. So we will go back and umpire the game. To be honest, the game, thankfully, is nothing like it was 20 years ago. Yeah. And so, my second game ever involved in AFL football, I was an emergency umpire, and it was the line in the sand game.
Hawthorn really? That one?
And I've run out on the ground, and there's just people with broken noses and blood
everywhere.
And it was just crazy, right? We don't see that now. That's not the way in which the game's played. It's hard, it's fierce. They are so big, so fast, and brutal. But they're not the filthy stuff. Obviously, has been smacked out of the game, right? And the game's better for it, in my view. So ultimately, they're wrestling, messing each other's hair up. We don't need to be worried about that. There are a million cameras, and there's other mechanizations in place there that can pick that up. MRO, tribunal, whatever. But if we see something that's like, someone's got in a headlock and whatever, we can pay for a kick. Yeah. But ultimately, we'll go back and umpire the game.
No, that's really fascinating perspective, because certainly it's something, especially if you're just watching on the other side of the TV, you don't always necessarily get that full scope of what's actually going on. So thanks for sharing that perspective. Now, we'll continue to discuss, we could discuss the on-field scenarios and machinations all night. We may well do that still. But before we get to all of that point, I guess, where did the love of footy first begin for you? Because we've had lots of amazing people that have played, that have been purely consumerist when it comes to the game over the years. Officiating is obviously a different pillar again altogether in terms of contributions to the game. So where did the footy love begin, and how did that become a pathway towards officiating the game?
It's a bit of an accident. My mother's uncle was a man by the name of John Hawke, and he played rugby league and he captained St George when they won 11 premierships in a row. He was part of that team.
Yeah, right.
And he played for Australia. And so we had rugby league in our family. Now, obviously, it's hardly a loss to the great game of NRL that I didn't play. It'd be a human speed hump. But that would have been the code that I was meant to go and get signed up for. And my father was always busy working.
Yep.
He worked very hard, my dad. And anyway, mum got the strops up one day because he hadn't gone to sign me up. So she throws us all in the car, my younger brothers and myself. We go to the nearest oval, and it says football registration today. And so I get registered, and I train for the next 6 weeks with my new best mates. And Dad comes to watch my first game, and we get out of the car, and there's 4 goal posts at that end and 4 goal posts at that end. He's looking at my mum going, "What on earth have you signed the boy up to?" And so, and the horse had bolted. I was playing Australian rules football, and mum and dad loved the game. They absolutely love it. They watch 2 games every week. They'll watch the Swans, and they'll watch whatever game I'm butchering, and they just love it. You know, they coached. Mum was the vice president of the league. You know, they're just immersed in it. So we love Australian rules footy. And then in terms of umpiring, I played about 200, not quite 250 games for my club.
Yep.
And I play with guys around my era from my area with guys like Aaron Hamilton, Justin Blumfield, Craig Cole, those sorts of guys. They were unbelievably good players. I wasn't. And we played rep footy and all of that. We won premierships and, you know, all the stuff.
Well, with names like that, you've got to, right?
Right. And so they came from my part of town in Canberra. And then I went to a game to watch my brother play. My mum was a bit worried about him and wanted me to pay more of an interest in him.
Yep.
I was 17, he was 12. I turned up to watch him and no umpire turned up. And so they said they'd fill my car up with petrol and they wouldn't let anyone yell at me if I umpired the game. So I did that, and a gentleman by the name of Bob Stacey, who was observing another umpire on another ground, he come over and introduced himself. He said, "How long have you been doing this for?" I said, 45 minutes. And he goes, "No, not today. You know how long you've been doing it?" I said, "Mate, I understood the question. I've been doing this
45 minutes.
And he goes, "Mate, you can earn 6 figures part-time doing this." And this is 30 plus years ago.
Yep.
So that got my attention. And
of course.
Yeah, it sort of went from there. And I love the game. And I had some really positive experiences as a young person. You know, we do sometimes hear a little bit about the horror stories.
Of course.
That some young people experience in community sport, AFL, soccer, rugby league, whatever.
Yeah, and it can happen in any sport too, yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't experience a lot of that when I started, and I was very fortunate. I had a lot of support, a lot of positive reinforcement, and I think that helped my resilience,
yep.
Which, you know, obviously holds you in good stead as you move through the ranks and everyone starts thinking we're playing for the farm. So, yeah, that's how I got involved in Australian rules footy and how I got involved in umpiring.
Now, obviously, you mentioned the parents and the love of the Bloods, the Swans. There was, I know these days, very different story. Of course, you've got to be as neutral as you can possibly be, and you're going to officiate all 18 teams over the course of any given year, presumably multiple times in a lot of cases. So, when it comes to allegiances when you were younger,
yes,
was it the Swannies as well? Was that just?
No, it's quite interesting. So, I'll share a little story. I've made the AFL, right? It's all fabulous. And I go to umpire a game, and Mark Choco Williams, who I just adore as a human being,
yep.
he's the coach of Port Adelaide, and they're playing Essendon, and Essendon are the Grouse, and Port Adelaide are real good too. They're gonna ultimately win a premiership, right? And I'm doing this game with 2 of our guys who will forever, like, they'll be Hall of Famers for us, okay, in what we do. And I'm the third wheel, right? I'm the problem.
Yeah.
So we go into this change room, right? And I've not seen anything like it. And next thing you know, Choco's got me in a corner. And, you know, because on the footy record, it says Ray Chamberlain, Victoria. Well, I'm from Canberra, right? But I came through the VFL, so Victoria. And so he's gone, you know, he's thinking we're all Victorian umpires, right? So he's getting stuck in.
There's that bias and all that sort of stuff.
And it was brilliant. And he's going, "Don't worry about our ruckman," like this. Anyway, he stops for a minute and he says to me, "Who'd you barrack for growing up?" And I said, "The Tuggeranong Cowboys." Like this, right? That was our local senior team.
Yeah.
And he starts laughing. He goes, "You're going to be okay, mate," like that. And we've got along thick as thieves ever since. So whenever anyone asks me who do I barrack for, I always tell them it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. And but in terms of footy, when you're a kid, you're passionate about the game. You want to play AFL footy, and you've got idols.
Yeah.
And Dermot Brereton, I remember I was a kid. I was like 9 or 10, and he came and did a sportsman's night at our footy club. And I thought Elvis had walked into the building.
Well, he had that strut, didn't he?
Proper. And so it was him and John Platten. And I was just awestruck. We didn't have Fox footy. We didn't have those things. We got to see the second half of the VFL match of the round. That's what we saw in Canberra as far as footy was concerned. And so I had this, oh, mate, they're the Kings, whatever. But of course, once you go down a certain path, if I take my friends to the MCG to watch a footy game, they come from Canberra to come down and visit or whatever.
Yeah.
The ball will go out of bounds, and then I'll be going, oh. And they're like, what? And I'll say, oh, he's meant to go there and she's meant to.
You start critiquing through a totally different lens, yeah.
And they're going, are you watching the umpires? I go, yeah, that's what I do, mate. Like, that's the lens through which I see this game. And, as you appreciate, everyone else gets to passionately watch it like this. And I have to critically.
But you get to be eyes wide open.
Right, I have to critically watch it with both of them. And so it's just a different experience. I hope when I retire and I'm done with all that I can potentially go back to being a loose unit and passionately follow a club.
Yeah.
But I don't hold heaps of hope for that. You know what I mean? It's ingrained.
Yeah, you've been so neutral for so long that you just, which I think there's a luxury in it. And also it feels a little bit like some of the American models as well, and especially I think of things like the NBA, for example, where there's so many people that gravitate not necessarily to a team. Of course, there's supporter bases for different teams, but really gravitate to a player. People will follow LeBron wherever he goes or whatever the case happens to be, and actually as a result have a broader perspective of what's going on competition wide. The number of people that I talked to over the years who, they support whoever their team might happen to be in the AFL, but then they couldn't tell you anything really about the opposition at all.
Yep.
And that goes back to the one-eyed perspective you're talking about. And obviously this extends further to the umpire.
It's quite insular and narrow as opposed to that other option. And so, look, for sure, I can watch any club and have incredible appreciation for players in any club. Go, oh my God, he's so brave. Wow, he's fast. At all clubs. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, and I think there's different mechanisms in place, and certainly as you spoke about back in the day, didn't have things like Fox Footy and those sort of things to present players like that and present the game and opposition teams like that. I certainly remember for myself, it was actually things like the old AFL Dream Team, for example, that was like, I can't just pick a team full of Geelong players here, so I have to actually investigate and go a little bit deeper. Now, this was, 13-year-old Paul or whatever the case would have happened to have been. Like, I actually need to start thinking a little more deeply about this at this point. And so I look at the numbers, and then I start watching them a little bit more on the weekends, and then I started making observations into how teams are playing, and all of a sudden, the level of knowledge that I started to build grew well beyond, okay, what do I need to just, get the best team and score the most points this round? But it really started, okay, this is how this team is, endeavoring to play, how, matchups, all those sort of things. And look, I don't want to give a silly little meta game too much credit, but it was, I think, one of the most important things for me in terms of actually understanding the game on a deeper level was through stuff like that.
Oh, no doubt. And, I think all of those, it's so, you try to explain to people. I remember when I was a school teacher back in the day when I first came to Melbourne and made the AFL list. And the staff would have a tipping comp.
Yeah.
And I go, I'm sorry, I'm not able to participate. And they're like, what? You go, yeah, mate, we're not allowed to do anything like that. They go, you're not even allowed to do a school tipping comp? I go, no, we're not.
Yeah.
And so all of that stuff is just out the window for us. But I understand how it is such a great tool for dream teams and all that sort of stuff, for those who fantasy points and all that sort of gear.
Super coach, etc.
For the real diehards, absolutely.
But I think it can also be such an educational tool for people as well as they start to dive a little bit deeper into it. And it certainly worked for me, and I assume it's worked for many others over the years. And so I guess as you climbed the ranks and we've obviously spoken about the line in the sand game being one of your very first, and that's certainly an exciting, an exciting and interesting way to kind of really launch the career at that point. But as things continue to develop from there, and you started to get more ingrained in the system, what was it like? I mean, for years we've kind of always heard the Razor name attached to you. You've had this personality exist beyond necessarily just Ray Chamberlain, AFL umpire. There's been always a little bit of extra something attached to your name, and so I guess how did things build for you personally? And I guess as you were starting to make observations, I'm sure of what people were saying and thinking and doing as well. How does this all build up to become what we know today?
Yeah, I sometimes have chats with mates who I went to primary school with, played footy and cricket with as kids, and all of that stuff. And they go, "This is so funny because you're the same flog you were in year 4. Like you're just the same guy." And I go, "Yeah, I know." I'll be honest with you. I had a lot of trouble dealing with it. I didn't like it. I didn't have any say in how I was being portrayed. But you got to understand, the game itself has evolved enormously from being whatever it was 20 years ago,
Of course,
to now being, it's entertainment. All right. And so therefore personalities and opinions and the podcasts,
shows like this,
right? Like it's the whole bag. Now this may seem to be in complete opposite end of the scale from what I'm about to say, but I never, because of the fact that I'm on here doing this and whatever, but I've never sought this out, and we don't ever want to be the central part of the game at all. Actually,
you're a facilitator, right?
Our whole purpose is to serve the game, and by that I mean the players, the coaches, and fundamentally the fans. And so we really do lean into that. However, I can tell you when it happened, right? So
please.
It was the 7th of the 7th, 2007, right? So there's a bit of numerology there. There's one for Cam.
Can appreciate it. Cam, you love it.
So I'd been harassed a bit by Jeff Geishan, and he kept saying, "Look, Triple M want you to do this interview. We think it'd be great." I said, "Look, that's great. I don't want to do it. Okay, I'm not interested. It's not going to be cool for me. I don't want to do it." And I was anxious and nervous, and I was young and probably a little silly and unnecessarily anxious, because quite frankly, they couldn't have been nicer to me, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, but I was very nervous. BT and Brayshaw
personalities,
and Damien Barrett, and I'm like, mate, I don't want anything to do with that.
No, I can understand how that might set off little alarm bells for someone who's still trying to carve out their own space within the
you just want to umpire well, right, and get picked for good games and do finals and things like this, right?
Respected.
Well, this is it, and be good at what you do, right? And anyway, in the end, it got to a point where Geish basically said to me, "You're going to thank me for this in due course. I'm not asking anymore, I'm telling. So you're doing it, and it's this weekend." And Collingwood played St Kilda at the MCG, and I remember dropping a line, because I couldn't go on there and try and be super serious, because they're just going to take the mickey. So I went, "All right, I've just got to lean into this," right? And I said something silly like, I panned it to James. I was talking about cricket. So James, if it's been said on a cricket field, you've heard it. You've played at the high levels of cricket. And I told him about playing a game and having the line that got thrown from back here was, the dingo took the wrong Chamberlain, right? And they lost their mind laughing, right? Like Gary Lyon was giggling for like 10 minutes. He couldn't stop, which was funny, right? So that was cool. And so then we just played along, did the thing, took off, went and umpired, and then that was it, right? You can't take the cordial out of the water. So BT's got hold of it, and he's got gone, "Righto, this is my boy, I'm hopping on this bloke." And so as his comet took off and he had his little personalities, Dion Prestia, the human meatball, same with this Razor Ray.
You're roped into it too.
And those guys were cool, because I understood what they were doing and I didn't have a problem with that. But people who I'd never met, I'd never spoken to, I didn't know them, only through the fact that they were a commentator or a journalist or whatever. They'd be talking about this Razor Ray person and making comment and casting judgment, and I never even met him.
And does this trigger all that anxiety that you were talking about going on in the first place? These were the things you were worried about.
Proper, like horrible. And the way I'm built is, I want to be able to say, "Well, hang on, mate, you don't even know me, actually. We've never met. I'm not equal. I'm not as bad as what people say. I'm nowhere near as good as what people say. The truth of it's somewhere in the middle, Paul, to be
Always.
fair. And so that used to really, I found that quite challenging, to a point where I went and sought help,
Yep.
actually, and went and got sought help from a counsellor, and would see them regularly over pretty much close to a 12-month period. And there was a raft of things going on in life at that stage, and what happened, and surgery on a knee and all sorts of stuff. And that helped me understand that, hey, bro, the problem's you, and the way that you're contextualizing this, sharpen
Yep.
up. So I worked on that for about 12 months, and and then realized that actually this is actually not a bad thing at all. Yeah, and so it evolved from there.
I mean, so I guess at the time you felt a little bit powerless in terms of, you don't necessarily know these people. You know of them, but you've never been able to communicate with them. Did you find yourself reaching out to them behind? Everything is so public facing, and I mean, it's a big industry,
Yeah,
but it's also a very small pond at the same time. Everyone
I
really
think
knows everyone, and so there's usually connections there. Were there ways for you to be able to chat to some of these critics potentially on the side, and be able to explain things in the way that you needed them to be explained?
I think there's a couple of things. You can't take yourself too seriously, because
Yep.
we're not saving lives. I'm umpiring a game of footy. That's the first thing. Second thing is, like, with time, you get to demonstrate your behaviour consistently. So you might meet people at a Brownlow event. You
Yep.
might be on a pre-season camp with so and so, and you're away. You go away with the All Australian team to Ireland. You spend a month with them. Do you know what I mean? And
It's
and
the
so then
networking.
you go out, you have a beer. You're just a normal person. They get to see you, warts and all, and they go, "Oh, okay, cool. I understand that now." And then the other bit is, and I'm really grateful for my peers about this, like guys like Sean Ryan, who lives down your way, and Brett Allen. These
Yep.
guys are actually the people who are actually our legends, and they taught me and role modeled for me that, look, if you're good at what you do consistently for long enough, and you get up the games and you do that, that starts to remove a lot of that other garbage. People then go, "Oh no, we get this guy, we trust this guy," whatever it might be, right? So there's a whole lot of inputs with
Yeah.
that. Um, and then there's other stuff, right? So, like, I remember having a coffee. I'm going to be a vlog here and name drop. I had a coffee with
Please.
Damien Fleming, and he was unreal with the way he sort of gave me a bit of a slap around the face. He helps us with some charity stuff we
Oh yeah.
do.
Yep.
So he's incredibly generous man, as well as being funny as hell.
Yeah.
And
He's pretty good on the lip too.
And he's like, "Mate, how cool is it to be able to have a moniker that you didn't have to worry about making up yourself?" He goes, "Oh, do you know how embarrassing it is to have to call yourself the bowlologist?" Right? So he was able to contextualize this as, "Hey, mate, this can work actually for you." But I'll give you one other story about it. I remember picking my daughter up from after school care one day.
Yep.
She wasn't there all the time, and generally, to be fair, my wife did all the heavy lifting there. But for whatever reason, one day I had to collect her, and she was young then, so she liked me, and she came running across, and big hug, and we picked up her bag, and there were some older kids, year six kids, and they were sort of looking.
They
Anyway,
recognise you.
the next day she comes home and she goes, "Oh, Dad, some boys were talking to me today." I said, "Oh yeah, what about?" She's like, "Oh, they're going, is your dad Razor Ray?" And I said, "What did you say?" She goes, "I don't even know what a Razor Ray is." Right?
And you
And I
go,
say, "Same here, mate. I don't even know what a Razor Ray is either, mate." So it's funny, like, just the way things are presented, and then
yeah, of
how they
course.
have their own legs. But for me now, I just know that I just timestamp it is what it is for me now. So people who call me Chambo, I knew before
From a certain
AFL,
period.
whether as a kid or when I was teaching kids at school or whatever. And then anything that's got Razor over it, it means from when I started in the AFL, that's when they've met me.
That
And
makes
so
sense.
that helps me reference, hey, where do I know this person from, or what have you?
Based on what they refer to you as.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I like that. Now obviously you were just talking about, and I guess children. There's a whole other facet to that as well. But obviously as an AFL umpire, you're not necessarily always going to be someone's favorite person in the world, depending on the
Really?
certain calls you might make on certain weekends, and obviously the one-eyed nature of supporter bases that we discussed earlier. So I guess there's the day to day, which is, if you're going down for grab a coffee or whatever the case happens to be, and you deal with, I'm sure you inevitably bump into Joe Citizen, who potentially wasn't too thrilled with a call that was made the night before. Again, probably wrong in their commentary, but anyway. But then there's, I guess, the other aspect, which is you've got children and they would potentially be exposed to some of this sometimes. What is that like with some of the external noise, the things that go on outside of game day? Because, I mean, I'm sure there's a conversation to be had about the ways that there's some times where a certain supporter base, sometimes the home team, can be howling at the umpires, unfortunately, on your way off the ground after the game, which is in and of itself a real shame that sort of thing happens. But I'm sure it's maybe a little bit easier to compartmentalize that as opposed to day-to-day interactions where potentially these sort of things can follow you. What is that like through the week when you've got supporters who may be a little bit upset still about a decision that was made? And I mean, on the family side of it, have you ever had any unfortunate circumstances where that's kind of impacted partners and kids?
No, great questions. So there's lots of ways I could answer it. The first one is when I'm watching my brother-in-laws, they used to play in the NRL and that sort of stuff. I'm a sports nut. I love it, right? Doesn't matter what it is. I'm into it, particularly the cricket and the NRL. I love sport. And so I'll barrack hard, right? Whether it's the Raiders or whatever it might be, I'll barrack hard. And so when I'm officiating in my capacity as an AFL umpire, I love that energy. And they're hammering us and all that sort of stuff. I don't mind that. That comes with the territory. And actually, I missed it enormously during those COVID years when we had no fans. You know, it was like, shit, this is the key component of what makes this the elite AFL experience, is this energy and this beast that's got its own heart and lungs, right? So I'm all about that. There's no problem with that. But when, someone then gets online because they think they're tough and you get a death threat, right, which I've had two of that have been followed up by the AFP, that's different, right? That's like, nah, that's crap, actually. And am I worried? No, not one bit. Am I worried about what, keyboard toolbag has to say at, Italian _stallion _19? I'm not worried about that too much, right? That's not, I have time for that, right? I'm living my life, mate, right? So none of that worries me. Where that will impact you, if you're really honest, is when, if it affects your mum or your wife or your kid.
Your kids.
I remember my daughter saying to me, so again, she's in year 4, right? So she doesn't know all this stuff.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, Dad, it's pretty cool, though, that you umpire in the AFL, because if we don't return the sports gear on time at lunch, you're banned for a week for being able to borrow it.
Yeah, right.
But because you're my dad, it doesn't matter. So long as I take it back at some stage. So
there's some perks, right?
Right. And I'm saying to her, well, mate, cash in now, because when you get to high school, it's going to be an absolute...
They'll turn on you.
Right, like that. So there's all ups and downs to it. I'll say this. People are overwhelmingly great.
Fantastic.
Right? Like overwhelmingly great. And because we all share something in common, we love this game, right? We love footy. So they'll come and ask questions. Oh, what's with this or whatever? And you go, well, do you want me to explain it? And they go, yeah, why do you have to do that? And you go, well, mate, I agree with you, but da-da-da-da. And you explain, they go, oh, I didn't know that. You go, yeah, I know, but that's the job, so that's what we're going to do. Oh, okay, fair enough. Still a crap rule. And you go, yeah, no, I agree. So people are great, actually, and it's an absolute minority, but they do unfortunately exist. But I don't do a whole heap of social media and all that sort of stuff. I sort of stay out of hate club and get on with doing the things that I want to do with the people.
You got a job to do.
Yeah.
Got a job to do and a family to look after, and I think all of those things need to take precedence. So it's fantastic. Firstly, you're not enduring too much. It's a shame about those couple of AFP things, and hopefully there's no more of that to be seen or heard of ever again. But I'm glad to hear there's been so many positive experiences, because it can be a very heated and emotion-driven environment, and for you to have not had to endure too much stuff is fantastic to hear. Now, I guess let's start kind of delving into some of the various experiences over the journey. You've been fortunate enough to umpire different grand finals. I think about the grand final 2010 and the replay, There's 2019, quite a few different grand finals that you've been a part of at this point. And so, I guess for you, in terms of preparation for these occasions, and even I guess we can reflect upon some of the memories from some of these days as well. What is it like for an AFL umpire to be able to be there and be such a key figure on the biggest day on the AFL calendar?
Well, I could try and downplay it and whatever. There's been less than 60 men to this point. That'll change in due course.
Of course.
But at this point, there have been 60 men in the history of the game, roughly, in the history of the game that have ever had the opportunity to officiate in an AFL grand final as a field umpire, right? So they don't just hand it out. And,
Gotta earn it.
And it's an incredible day. I remember. So the preliminary finals are a real challenge because you're so close and they're the hardest games and there's just so much of this extrinsic stuff. So the capacity to be able to go bin all of that and actually just be here going, it's just the same. That's the challenge, actually. So then you navigate that. Let's say it's Friday night. You've knocked that over and you've done well. Let's just say you've had we're never faultless, but you go, no, I've had a good game. You're like, if they want to pick me, they can, right? So now it's out of your hands, okay? Now, I've been the emergency umpire, so the first loser, as many times as I've actually been picked. And so it's just a horrible experience, actually.
Yeah,
it sucks, right? And so you wait from Friday to Monday afternoon generally before you receive the phone call to say, congratulations, you've been selected, or
you've missed out.
You've missed out. So it's this 72 hours where you don't sleep, you watch the other game, you've got a million phone calls coming from people because they care, and it's just horrendous. So the lead-in for that week isn't great recovery, actually. You know what I mean?
Because your head's not in it.
No, well, you're bustled. And then once you get the call, again, I talk about people who I'm most grateful for, and they're my peers. These are guys who've got way better records than me, right? Simon Meredith, Sean Ryan, Brett Roseberry, Matt Stevick, these sorts of lads, right? Where they gave me great advice. I remember Sean saying to me, "You got two choices here, mate. You can reply to every message you get, right? And because they're reaching out because they love you and care about you and they're proud of you, or you can ignore all of them." And he goes, "I did the latter the first time and I regret it."
Yeah, right.
And it was such great advice and so kind of him to be thoughtful. And so I replied to everyone, right? And for the first couple of days, that was hard work.
Lot.
Yeah, it is. So then you got that press conference the next day, and then you're training. We have this unbelievably cool function on Thursday where the AFL will bring a guest speaker, Lee Matthews or something like that, and they come and talk to us about the game, their experiences, etc. And you're there with just wives, girlfriends, and they put together a vision package, and it's really cool, and it's one of the best things you'll do. And then Friday's obviously the parade, which is just off tap, an amazing experience. And then it's game day, and I remember the first time, which was 2010. That was cool. I woke up and I felt great. And my wife was going, "You don't have to have tough. You don't have to have tough to me. How are you actually feeling?"
Yeah.
And
but you're really feeling it.
Yeah. If you're nervous, you can tell us that. No. I feel amazing. This is going to be great, actually. And it was the most brilliant occasion and such a great game and a draw and all of that stuff. But my favourite memory out of the grand finals, emergencies, whatever, was 2019 when I was selected. My daughter got to come with me in the parade, right?
Oh, very nice.
And she was old enough that she still remembers it today and can talk about it, whatever. And she was young enough to think it was cool. So it was.
You found the sweet spot, right?
Right, we're in a sweet spot where actually this works. I'm the king. I'm a great dad all of a sudden, right? So just having her in the car and people yelling out her name and stuff. That's probably my highlight of in terms of that sort of stuff. That's my fondest memory.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very akin to players when they get to bring out their children or whatever for big milestones. Or obviously we've seen a lot of them in the last couple of weeks with retirements and those sort of things, and being able to walk off the ground with their families or whatever the case happens to be. It sounds like a very equivalent sort of experience when you get to actually share these things with the people that you love the most. I would only assume that they are some of the most gratifying moments.
Well, because they forego so much, and I'm really fortunate. My wife, she played sport as a kid and played reps and at different sports, and then her brothers are professional footballers. Her sister worked in professional sport at the NRL for decades, so she understands it, values it, sees and when we met, I was doing it. So the And so I've only ever get unequivocal, yes, do it, whatever it takes type thing. But it's been 20 years, Paul.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you got to pay the ferryman back, right? So they forego a lot and they put up with a lot. And so that you can be, in a way, incredibly bloody selfish. So, yeah, when you get an opportunity where they can share in some of that joy, clearly that's a great thing.
And I guess there's just some opportunities there when, we've touched on injuries and those sort of things, where maybe just put a little bit of mayo on it and just squeeze an extra week or two out and go, look, I'll stay home and look to do my bit, right? So obviously we spoke about 2010 and the draw, and so what was that like for you when, this is an iconic moment in AFL history. You got to be officiating it. That siren sounds. Did you firstly were you acutely aware of what the scores were at the time that the siren went in the first place?
I knew it was super tight, and I didn't know the score. I didn't know the scores were equal.
The level.
I'm immersed in what I'm doing until the point went through where Milne couldn't get to it.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
And then I was down at that end, given the all clear. Ball gets exited, goes out of bounds, and I knew it was close, but I didn't know how close. And I just turned my head to have a look, and I went, "Oh Jesus, it's actually even."
It's level, yeah.
And it was only, it was hardly any longer, and the siren sounded, and I was still at that end of the ground. And I remember Nick Maxwell and Nick Rewalt were sort of coming towards the middle of the ground, and Roo sort of goes to me, "Razor, what does that mean?" And so I sort of said to him, "Well, mate, the goal umpires will come in and tell us if it's accurate, but if it is, we've got to come back next week." I can't tell you what he said. He wasn't thrilled.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been thrilled.
Yeah. So, and then I remember as we sort of gathered in the middle, and it was confirmed that that's the score, and we're walking off, and we're just like, what does all this mean? And there were a couple of interactions that took place, but our coaches, they came on very quickly, and they're like, "Listen, great job. You should be proud of yourselves. We can tell you now, you're all in again next week. So, get yourself ready."
Double dip.
We had overseas trips booked, and it's our mad silly Sunday Mad Monday kit and all that. We couldn't go to that. Everyone else was on that. So yeah, it was a very unique experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was unreal, and a couple of really great days actually. Yeah.
I guess you've touched on firstly the fact that when you've been in this sort of position in the past, there's been the 72 hours of not knowing and the anxiety around that. So I guess, tick, you knew that you're on board straight away. That's nice. But obviously when there's a draw, typically in any given game, there's always a little bit of a very awkward feeling around the stadium. There's kind of a hollow feeling for some people. So to magnify that by so much for that AFL Grand Final, what was that like for you then, again, as someone officiating?
We went to a function that night. Now, for me, I was loving it, right? I was going, this is the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to do my second grand final.
I go again.
This, right? I'm all about this. And it was very different because there was none of the fanfare during the week. It was like a normal week, of training.
Of course. Everything was dialed down considerably.
No parades and any of this sort of garbage. It was just, right, get ready and we front up again. So I didn't mind it, but I was a bit, again, it was my first, I'm green, I'm naive, I'm sort of loving the experience, whereas the guys who are way smarter than me, way more experienced than I am, they had a slightly different take on it. I remember Brett Roseberry, who is now the game's record holder, and, he's done
achieved so much,
so many finals and everything else. And I remember him sitting, we're at a function, and he was sitting aside and he looked upset. And I went over to make sure he was okay. I'm like, "Mate, are you all right?" And all he could say to me was, it's not finished yet. And so I share that with you because what officials do, in my experience, is they're there to serve the game and the players, and we don't win or lose, right? So we're just waiting to exhale, actually. And so then when the game's done, the results happen. It's not about us. They're talking about, whoever's won,
the loser,
the medals, and we can then go away and go, thank God, right? And now we can feel good about life.
But you didn't get to
go on a trip and whatever. But Brett summed it up so beautifully, actually, in that we can't breathe out yet. And so, that was probably, him understanding the weight of which is on us when we're afforded the privilege of officiating in that last Saturday in September.
Yeah, that's... it's a fascinating additional perspective on the whole thing, because obviously we've heard so much over the years from the Collingwood or the St Kilda players in terms of what it meant week 1, what it meant week 2, and everything that kind of transpired. But the umpiring perspective is a really fascinating one. So thanks so much for sharing that one. You've had opportunities, as you touched on earlier, being involved in the international rules as well, which is a whole other kettle of fish. And so what was that like? As you mentioned, kind of get to have a few beers with the players and those sort of things. And so the interactions are very, very different as well. So what was that period like?
Well, my first go at that was by accident, and because there's a couple of people who couldn't do it. And so I got to go along as the emergency to learn. So I got the trip to Ireland without basically any responsibility. It was the greatest thing in the world. And I just carried Brett's bags for 3 weeks around Europe. And anyway, but I learned, there were guys like Ty Kennelly and Zach Tui and these guys who were involved, Pierce Hanley,
the Irish
team that were playing AFL footy, right? And I got to immerse myself and understand and learn about the different cultures and the way they view sport and the way they view officiating in sport. So like in the GAA, you'll have a club ref that'll travel around those games. So you can immediately imagine the neighbouring county going, from County Clare, and old mate's come up from County Cork and he's reffing that game. They're going, this bloke's a cheat. He's in business with this guy. It's crazy, right? And so, whereas the AFL boys, they look at us and they go, you're totally impartial. So then you're over there and you're viewed entirely differently by the two different teams based on their own cultural experience within sport.
That's really fascinating.
And so you've basically got this little blue helmet on, like you're in the United Nations, no gun that you're allowed to fire until fired upon, and you're just copping it left, right, and centre. Cool. So in a game that no one knew the rules really, right? So like I'll give you an example. The Irish had too many players on the field.
Oh, really?
Come out after a break, and ball up goes away, goal. And I'm like, that's a bit weird. He got out easy. A bit oblivious.
Until you did a head count.
Do it again. And I'm like, no. This was a Mick Malthouse coach team. This doesn't happen, right? So I've jerried on, there's a problem here. And I've immediately started counting the Irish players. And I got to say 15, and I go 16. And then I see Mick. He's looking at me on the bench, and he knows I've jerried onto this, and that I'm counting. And then he sees me and he's going, call for a head count. And so I go, well, you've got to call for a head count. We can't. So they did. Now, do they annul the score to 0? Is it a free kick? The laws of international rules is a book that's like 4 pages long, right? I got this printout. I'm sitting on the bench going,
flicking through.
No one's told us what we do. What do we do here? Full stands. I'm looking up at the stands where Adrian Anderson and all these guys are sitting going, want to throw me a bone, right? So in the end, we got the dude off the ground. We paid Australia a free kick, and we just got on with it, right? But so it's just nuts. And it's all about managing relationships.
Yeah,
actually.
Of course.
And so again, it was just another example of having to build trust in different ways with different people who have got to come from an entirely different experience to what I've grown up with. And being able to respect that, understand that, and then try and navigate that together. And great.
It creates some funny moments from time to time.
Mate, great trip. It was unreal. We had a ball.
No, that's awesome, and again, another really fascinating perspective. And I'll admit, and I guess maybe time zones played a little bit to do with it. I don't necessarily recall that moment, but I'm going to have to go and dig it out now and just see if I can watch some old archival footage and see just how effectively
You'll see
you
Mick
handled that
blowing
moment.
up is what you'll see. You'll see Mick going off his head.
Yeah, that wouldn't necessarily surprise me, I guess. And so over the years, you've obviously, as we've touched on, you've been able to officiate every different club, and I'd be remiss if, being a Geelong show, we didn't hone in a little bit on the Geelong side of things. What have been some of your, I guess, memorable experiences you've had with players from the Geelong Football Club, with coaches, with the crowd? Anything that really sticks out? Obviously, throughout your time in umpiring, Geelong has been a pretty successful team for the most part.
They've been an incredibly successful team.
What's it been like, and is there anything that sticks out?
There's a whole heap of stories and experiences that I've been really fortunate enough to be supported actually by the Geelong Footy Club in many ways. Like, there's some stuff along the way that, I probably didn't like in certain aspects, but I remember during COVID, on 2 occasions, I was required to be with other umpires as well, but we were in a hotel quarantine for 2 weeks, and we were in there and we were able to use their gym, and you're eating, having coffee, and all those things together within this complex where no one else is allowed in. And they were incredibly accommodating when you consider the circumstances there. I've umpired an enormous amount of those Easter Monday games,
yes,
and which are just magnificent, cracking games. They're the best.
Always a spectacle, yeah.
And I remember Jimmy Bartell kicking a point after the siren to win one particular game in 2009, I think that was. And, just banging games. I remember I umpired the game where both Geelong and St Kilda were undefeated after.
The Michael Gardner goal.
The line of the mark, kicked his 4th goal, and they win by 4 points or whatever it was. And there was the Max Rook advantage and all sorts of gear around that. And that was just an incredible, incredible game. And they were such an unbelievably good side, Geelong, then. They were bloody ruthless, and they were brilliant to watch. I remember doing a game down in Geelong. I was only a kid. I was on the bench. I had to drive all the way to Geelong to sit on the bench.
Oof.
And it absolutely thumped down rain, and it was so cold. Dr. Peter Larkins, he was freezing in the Triple M thing like this, wet as hell. He had this big dryzer bone on, and they were playing Fremantle. And
I think the game's even starting to come to me now as you start to describe it.
Jeff Bum was playing for him, and he refused to go on the field after half time. He just looked at me and goes, "I'm not going out. I'm not doing it." And he did not move off the bench. It was that cold and that wet. I go, "Mate, I don't blame you." Yeah. So there's been.
You just got to take it up with the coaches, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It sounds like a you problem, Jeff. So yeah, there's lots and lots of memories that come to mind. Andrew Mackey, one of the funniest guys ever. I went and his old man was an umpire, right?
Yep.
I went down to train with Geelong. Clubs are unreal in letting us come and train with them and build relationships and talk through stuff. And all of a sudden I'm in a group with Mark Blitzarves. I'm going, I can't be running with this bloke. He's
going to show me up every day of the week.
This is not funny at all for me, guys.
I reckon it was for them.
Yeah, 100%. But again,
you got stitched up.
I remember Darren Milburn in a game at Etihad Stadium. It was then. Him and Aaron Hamill, the ball was in the middle, and they looked at each other and they just went whack. Like it was like a car accident. They hit each other that hard. I just remember thinking, he's so crazy brave. And, so there are those, I'm just thinking of these moments that just spring out of, these Geelong games that you've umpired, and then the players. I remember, like Gaz was obviously unreal,
brilliant,
but you've just got so many of them. I remember just having so much respect for Cameron Ling, who I first met as a kid, and he was in an underage Australian team, and him having to change from being this forward who wasn't going to be big enough to play key position at AFL level, but he wanted to play AFL footy, and then him to be able to be so disciplined and so simple-minded and selfless to develop into what he did for his club. And I remember first meeting him as a young guy, and you just go, wow.
You couldn't imagine it.
Can't help but just respect that, So lots and lots of Geelong Footy Club memories, to be honest, mate.
You've obviously touched on someone like a Gary Ablett Jr. there, and he's one of the greatest players we've ever seen. in the eyes of some, probably some especially who are watching or listening to this show, might argue the greatest player of all time. And so there's certain level of magic and spectacle and an aura that he has when you're umpiring. And someone like a Gary Ablett, but obviously there's so many other brilliant players as well, pull out some of these magic moments and they do things that just defy a little bit of logic. How do you kind of stay in the moment and focus on your job? Because I'm sure we're all human. It's very easy to potentially get swept up in some of these things and not necessarily fail to do your job and not blow the whistle when you should or whatever, but just maybe a little bit of awestruck. What's it like?
Listen, Paul, we go through a lot of dry things in what we do, right? And it's meant to be fun. I'll give you some examples. I remember in the 2008 grand final, and Gaz got the ball and he ends up kicking, it goes through for a goal, but he gets the ball and for all intents and purposes, he was going to get destroyed. He had 3 Hawthorn players bearing down on him. Changa was coming down at him. I think there were 3 defenders that were boom. Yeah. And he gets the ball and lands and he does this shimmy, go thing and just peeled his way through. And I was there as
absolutely taking the piss.
I was there as a spectator and my cousin's mad Hawthorn. And even he went, he's unbelievable, this bloke. Like, you know what I mean? So I remember that with him. But, let's look at some other examples. Lance Franklin's just retired and they talked about, him and Cale Hooker on the
down the wing.
And I umpired that game and I'm running a beeline down the middle of the ground while Frankie's running around the boundary line, bouncing it. And I'm going like a cat trying to keep up with him and just thinking, this guy's unbelievable.
It's a good thing they focus completely on Cale Hooker because I'm sure you're probably tongue hanging out trying to catch up as well, right?
100%, right? And so you can see this little dude in the green shirt just trying his hardest. And then, more recently, right, Tex Walker kicked this goal in the showdown recently. So he was 55 out, Alirali's on the mark, and he wheels out to kick on his right, and he feigns and gets Alir in the air, and he changes the ball into his left hand, and he goes drop punt like a tracer bullet from 55 metres out and kicks it into the stand, straight through the middle for a goal, and he goes nuts, right? And then the big fella come past me, and he gave me a bit of a wink, and you can't help but giggle, right? You go, that was absolutely incredible, right? So I think you've got to enjoy these things, Paul, where, they're brilliant players.
Yeah.
And if you can't appreciate it and you can't enjoy it, what are you doing?
Well, there's no reason this would apply to anyone in any profession that are in. Yes, it's all serious business, but there's always moments to savor and enjoy. And if you can't do that, then you're probably not in the right profession in the first place, right?
So go and do something else.
Exactly. So whether that's AFL umpiring, teaching, I guess we both can connect to that one, or anything else. If you can't find the joy in these things, then as you said, go find something else. It's not necessarily worth doing. And obviously AFL football provides so many amazing moments like that it's fantastic. You get to be a part of those and celebrate those. Another thing that's really important, and you touched on it yourself in terms of some of the struggles that you'd had at one point, is some of your advocacy for mental health. Now, I really want to open the floor up to you there because it's such a prevalent thing these days. I think people's understanding is growing and growing and growing about the challenges that some are facing, and you're doing some work in that space. So I'll open the floor right up to you so you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, a lot of this came about when I had an injury and it didn't look like I was going to be able to get back and umpire AFL footy, and so I had a bit of a tough trot, and then what I said to myself was, when I get back, right, not if, when I get back, and I missed basically 2 years, I'm going to lean into this whole Razor Ray thing. Like, you can't take the coil out of the water. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to accept it for what it is. I'm going to use it for something that's good. So let's have a look at a little bit around that, right? Our story isn't special. That's kind of the point, okay? And you've intimated that. It's so prevalent. In terms of, and we raise funds. We've got DGR status 1, deductible gift recipients. So if you donate to our foundation, it's fully tax deductible, and there's lots and lots of auditing and compliance and all this sort of stuff. And everyone who's on our board and is involved are entirely volunteers. But basically, what we do is we raise money. We're not experts in this space, but we provide funds to organisations who are
the experts.
And they are working and have programs that have direct impact in grief and support, loss support, as well as other measures, interventions for suicide prevention. And we got led into that space so basically I wanted to try and do something positive with my brothers, right? I'm always ringing them going, why haven't you rung mum? Who's paying for Christmas? And they're like, mate, you haven't lived here for 20 years, do one, right? You're not the boss anymore. And I was like, yeah, actually, a fair shout. You're adults, you've got your own kids. Let's do something fun. My brother's got a really successful business. My other brother, he's had a really he got this really cool role where he sits between industry and government. And he's brilliant at it, right? So he's like the intermediary and the communication liaison in between that. And he's unreal. And so we've all got different networks, and I've got this footy thing. So I said, why don't we do something? We'll raise some money, we'll give it to someone. Sounded great. And we'll make it challenging. We'll do it together. It'll be fun. And then we got busy with life. I'm driving home one day and the phone rings. It's my brother, and he was upset. And essentially his best mate, Robbie, had taken his own life and left a couple of young kids behind. And when he told me, and I tell this story because it's really important to me to mention this person's name. When Shane Warne passed away, Paul, I was reading all these tweets, and there was this incredibly, it smacked me in the face, and it said, it said you died two deaths, right? The first one is when you pass away as we know it to be, and the second one is when your name is said for the last time on this planet, right? And I went, wow, great context about Shane Warne, right? He lives on. And so I tell this story because it relates to my cousin. So when my brother said, Robbie took his own life, I thought he said Rob. I thought he meant my cousin, my best mate, my best man.
Yep.
And I was like, and he was having a tough time, right? And I was like, Jesus. And then it dawned on me, he said Robbie, he means his best mate. And then I felt better, which took some unpacking, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit to kind of work through there
100%.
as a result.
And so that gave us our purpose and our catalyst as to what we're going to do. And the reason why I say that is because 2 years ago, my cousin, my best mate, my best man, he passed away before his time. And so I tell that story because, you know, I want to always be able to say my cousin Rob's name.
Yeah.
But what we get to do is we get to have, our events aren't about doom and gloom. We get to celebrate the wins that our tribe are able to create funds and then support. And so met some unbelievable people. We've donated a tick over 400 grand along the way, and we've got some aspirations with that. But it's great. We have a luncheon every year at Crown in March, and that's growing in size. We're sort of getting up to 350, 400 people that and they're incredibly supportive. Crown to us, they're unreal. And then we'll do some other little challenges and bike rides. We do this razor ride thing, which we'll get one at the end of next season because I'll pull the pin from footy, I'd say, by that stage, and I'll be able to hook into that.
Lean into it a bit further.
But our first event, to give you this challenging idea, was boots in the water at on the south coast, Bermagui, and hike to the top of Mount Everest. And so there's these types of things that we do, and then we raise funds and awareness in that way. And I don't know, mate, like if the only thing I got out of football is been my ability to be able to bring some people together and, you know, like-minded, and we're all connected for a reason, right? We don't have to lean too hard into that. We know why we're all there. And then we're able to make something good of it and have people feel like they're doing something that helps. That's incredibly healing, actually, and uplifting.
Yeah, of course.
And I'll be honest, I get so much out of it. So it's, you're selfish. No, mate. Like, don't talk like that. I love it, and I get an enormous amount out of it. I meet so many cool people, and it's one of my favourite things to do, to be honest. And that's come as a result of being involved in footy.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah,
it's awesome, and yeah, I think anyone. Look, I don't want to cast paint with too broad a brush, but you know, anyone who does say that they do these things and it's a purely selfish endeavours, I mean, usually at its core, it is. That's where these things begin, but there's so much that can be derived out of that for an individual as well. And I don't mean profits, I don't mean status, I don't mean celebrity, I don't mean pats on the back.
No, it's more about healing. I remember, for my brother, he's got the emotional intelligence of this pen, And he knows I've said that about him before, right? Big heart, but he doesn't process real well, and it gave him a sense of doing something for Robbie and his kids, and it helped him deal with all of that. And I could see that visually, and I'm no different, and so yeah, taken a lot out of that.
No, that's fantastic, and it's awesome what you're doing, and it's great to hear that when the time comes to conclude your journey through the AFL system as an umpire, that you've got something amazing that you can be able to continue to contribute to, and potentially even take even further with the time that is available to you. So that's fantastic to hear. Now, just before we start to wind things up, I'd be remiss. There's a few mates of mine that I told that I was going to be I mentioned I was going to be chatting to you today, and they had one particular scenario. They're not Geelong supporters, or one of them in particular isn't a Geelong supporter. He reflected on a certain moment that involved you specifically. It was a final siren situation in a Hawthorn and Adelaide game.
Yeah, no, not my favourite one. Yep.
So
you want to know what happened,
I guess it's been a while at this point now. How do you reflect upon a moment like that? Because obviously there was there was challenges involved in the whole thing, and aspects that of course could not be helped. But how do you reflect upon that particular game and that particular moment these years on?
The funny thing about it, like there's a lot I learned out of that. I learned a lot about the English language. I learned how some people can take one thing and how words have meaning for different people. So I say that actually sincerely. There was a bit that come out of that I went, oh wow, and so I had to grow up a bit. The other part to it is I actually umpired brilliantly that night. Like I'll say that, people go, do one, Chamberlain, but like my performance
had a great game, yeah,
really, really great, and so it's just mad. But the lead up to it was there'd been a couple of very close games where siren hadn't been heard and goals were being kicked and what have you. And I remember Mark Evans came to tell us about this new U-Butte idea that they had, where they were going to have a chime ring in our earpiece so that we could hear the chime if we couldn't hear.
You always had something to fall back on.
And I, being me, put my hand up, and he said, "Yes, Ray." And I said, when the laws of the game were written, they had the new Adelaide Oval stands in mind, actually. And he looked at me quizzically, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, how so?" And I said, "Well, if any of the four field umpires, the three on the ground or the emergency umpire, hears the siren, that signals the end of the game, and they can call the end of the game. I also note that there's a countdown clock on the bench
everywhere these days,
change in the country. Why can't we have the emergency umpire just give us a 10 seconds to go, which will heighten
just
out?
Yeah.
Why do we need this other thing? Anyway, it would have been. It's 8 weeks later, right? We've umpired games and whatever.
Everything's worked fine up to that point,
and this chime goes off in my ear, and so I'm down that end. He's as loud as Billy O, and then I hear Matt Nichols, who, funnily enough, was involved in Siren Gate down at Tassie.
Dan Tassie,
right? And I hear him say, "I don't think that was the siren, Ray," right? And I'm like, "Oh no, this is going to be a disaster." Sam Mitchell comes at me, and like Sam, and I love Sam Mitchell. I've got so much respect for him. Again, I've known him since his Eastern Rangers and Box Hill Hawks days, right, and VFL and all that. So I've known him forever. But on field, he's like my kryptonite. Like I just can't copy his at me because he knows everything, right? He's so smart, so he just drills you. And I'm like, I can't have this. Anyway, we get off the ground, and the Fox cameraman comes up to me and he goes, "We heard it. We've got it here. We heard it, mate." Which made me feel better that I hadn't made something up.
Yeah, it wasn't in your own head.
But at the same time, it didn't resolve any of the issues, right? It was still going to be a problem.
Yeah, it was always going to be controversial regardless.
Yeah, so then, anyway, as I said, there was some other stuff around it, my choice of language and whatever else where, you learn, or you should. And so yeah, that's now 11 years ago. That one I think it might be, is it 11? Yeah, it's 11 years ago, 2012. So yeah, some things pop up that you would not expect.
Is it
yeah, you just got to. I just think you have to. I think they're all experienced. Don't even worry about being an umpire, right? Just worry about learning as being a decent citizen and how you handle
How you
things
handle difficult
in the
situations.
future, right? And that's what this role does. It challenges you in so many different ways when you least expect it.
Yeah, and certainly, yeah, would not have been expected. I'm sure. Going well. Apparently, you kind of forecast and foreshadow the possibilities a little bit yourself, but
Yeah. Maybe I'm not into manifesting, but who would have thought?
yeah, you might have brought it on yourself. I mean, obviously, there's the controversies around the whole thing. We've obviously discussed it a little bit in detail. There's something you can kind of, I guess, chuckle a little bit about these days.
Oh yeah, and look, in the main, absolutely. I mean, um, no, it's a game, right? And I didn't press it,
Yeah.
so we don't need to name and shame the timekeeper or whoever it
No,
was, but
of course.
I didn't press the time too early, and I responded exactly how I was supposed to
You
in
followed process.
terms of blowing the whistle, and then I knew the rule. Okay, I've had a blue, I've got to ball it up, um, and then then the learning is the mic and the camera's always on, and so then you just got to keep putting it to bed, being professional, being courteous and respectful.
Be the best you can be.
Yeah, and be the best you can be. Exactly right. So that's one that will definitely get a run in a book.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that one. So as we start to wrap things up, again, we are a Geelong-centric show, so a couple Geelong-centric questions just to wrap things up. You've had the privilege of being able to officiate some incredible players. We've touched on quite a few up to this point. In your eyes, as someone who's consumed footy before officiating, but also as an AFL umpire, who is the best cat that you've seen play this game?
Gee whiz, because I start thinking.
And there's lots of different ways you can look at it, of course.
Absolutely. Can I just start running some names and then
please?
I love your insight. So I think I go, Matthew Scully, right? Immediately I just go different unit, but my God, how good. I look at Bartel and Ablett. Again, you go, wow, you got Ottens, you got Danger and Selwood. Joel Selwood reminds me of my brother-in-law, Michael Monaghan. He's the hardest worker in the room. His teammates just love him. He's got blood coming out of him left, right, and centre all the time. He's as competitive as all get out, and yet he's a cracking human being and very, very kind off the field. And I've always been just gobsmacked by how generous Joel is, just with his time and how he treats people. So you keep going through those guys. I first met Cameron Mooney when he was playing for the New South Wales ACT Rams as a bottom age player, and he played with Mark McVeigh and Lenny Hayes and these guys. And even back then, he was running around scaring the shit out of people, pretending he was going to kill them and whatever else, and yelling.
You say pretending? I'm pretty sure he might have come close once or twice.
Oh, don't worry. He put the fear of God into blokes as a teenager. Have no fear. And so I've got a soft spot for him. I wouldn't say he's in those others echelon in terms of but just who he is and knowing him,
the presence.
Yeah. So they're probably the ones I'd box to start with. And then post their playing career, who, I'd see around in different traps. Steve Hocking's been incredibly kind to me over the journey and trusted me with some stuff that people before him hadn't necessarily. And he did incredible things with our group, where we're so much better for as a result of his time at the Big House. I think of Gary Hocking, and he was assistant coach at Collingwood, and I was doing lots of Collingwood games at that stage because they were going up and I was going okay. And he'd always give me a bit of shit before the game and would have a bit of banter and all those sorts of things. So I've got a lot of really fond memories of Geelong. The stadium now, my God,
it's come such a long way.
So immaculate. And then the town and the players themselves and the club. So no, I can understand why you're a proud Cats man, mate, regardless of the lineage. I can see that'd be easy to cheer for.
Yeah, they certainly are. Next one is schoolyard pick. You're building your own team. You've got Gary Jr. and Senior standing in front of you. Which way do you think you'd go if you had to pick one? Both at their prime, of course.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, yeah, different eras and all that, right? So we know all the different arguments.
Yes.
I'll go with Little Gaz because you know he'll turn up.
That's fair. Well, yeah, you'd always be unsure as to whether senior would actually attend on the day, so that's fair enough. And I guess like normally this kind of final question I tend to frame obviously with a bit more of a Geelong context and who's the next young player that we should keep our eyes on. I'm going to flip that a little bit. Obviously, I mean your name has been, and you've mentioned plenty of obviously amazing umpires that you've had the opportunity to work alongside. There is a new generation making their way through. Who's like? I mean, I hate to ask you to single people out or anything like that, but I guess of that next crop that are starting to come through. I mean, how are you feeling about this next generation of umpires? And is there anyone that's feel like is really doing this amazing job that's going to be an important figure in driving that side of the industry forward?
Yeah, we have we've got all these the guys I call the fossils, right? So they're sort of
the old hand.
They're at 350 games and beyond, and there's a handful of those guys, and we get around with our Zimmer frames, and we've been carrying things for probably 15 years, to be fair. And I remember at that time we all came on the list, and I said to you that there have been just a tick around 60 ever in the history of going to do a grand final. And in the space of 2 or 3 years, Ryan, Stevick, Meredith, Rosebery, Chamberlain, Nichols, Donlan, right? They all came on to the AFL senior list, and they've all been they're grand final umpires, those guys, right? So there's nearly the tick over 10% of all the grand final umpires ever came out of a single cohort that came up onto the AFL from the VFL, okay? And a guy named Peter Howe, who lives down your way, he was our coach at the VFL, right? And he's a jet. He's a great man. He did unbelievably good things for footy through umpiring. And there was Goldspink and McLaren and McBurney and all these guys, right? Kennedy. And they were like, oh, when these guys go, we're screwed.
What are we going to do?
Right? And lo and behold, the names that I just said, and they came to the fore and they take it forward. We have those guys and girls in our group. And I'm not going to name one because I don't want to put anything on them.
Yeah, we don't want to moz them.
That they don't want to carry themselves. But it's not just what they do on the field, it's who they are as people. We are a little white and we're a little male when you look at us, all right? That's changing, and that's because, and we're you look at community football and the endeavours of the AFL
it's
around
more
all
and more
that,
diverse.
You will see this come through in very, very soon. It's coming up through the ranks and through the talent pathway. But despite the fact that we're a little male and we're a little white, we are very different, like personalities, politics, you name it, right? We are very diverse. One thing I'll say about our group is they're bloody good human beings. They're not all my mates. They wouldn't all say I'm their mate, but they are bloody good humans, and the game's lucky to have them. And the next group that are coming through, I've had some experience this year umpiring with a lot of our first yearers. We had 10 debut this year.
Fantastic.
It was a quarter of our list, mate, are brand new. And they have got, if you're a player and you're coaching a player, you've got weapons. It might be your running carry. It might be whatever. If you look at that through that lens, they have weapons, and they just need time and experience. But it's in really good hands, and I have great confidence in them, actually.
No, that's fantastic to hear, and clearly the game is going to be in really good hands over the years to come. So thanks for sharing that little bit of insight, and we look forward to seeing some of those names and faces out there soon. But for now, you've still got some time out there on the field, and we're looking forward to seeing you continue to strut your stuff and have some great little one-liners with players that get picked up on the mic, not the ones that maybe problematic for you, but those genuinely good hearty laughs that we all get to kind of then feel a little bit of. It's been fantastic, and we're really appreciative of everything that you've contributed to the game up to this point, and looking forward to seeing what else is in store in the years to come.
Well, Paul, I've absolutely loved tonight, so thank you so much for even considering talking about umpiring and the tribe that have looked after me and I've been able to be a part of. We are a minor part of the game, but we are involved in the game. Without umps, there's no game. So I really appreciate you even taking the time to invite me, mate. And I'm very much looking forward to leaning into however long's left. And I'm sure the Cats they'll come back humming just fine in 2024. If I know anything about them, they'll come back hard.
Yeah, I'm quietly hoping that is the case, of course. Ray, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and to discuss this career of yours so far and sharing these amazing moments. It's been fascinating to pick your brain and learn about how some of these behind-the-scenes components that a lot of the public never sees, never hears about, how these things actually work. So thank you so much for coming on the show. If people, I mean, we referenced social media before, and you're not necessarily the most active in the space, but you'll frequent Instagram from time to time and others. Where should people go if they want to see what you're up to, interact in any ways?
So there's a Razor Raid Media, so that's legit, and I do some stuff with the content on there. I don't see all the nasty stuff, so if you want to hang it on me, I don't see it. So fill your boots. I don't look at that.
Take your shot, but it's not worth it.
Yeah, and then of course, in terms of, it's very basic, but in terms of if you wanted to come to our luncheon or whatever, and we get lots of AFL people come along and support that, the AFL themselves. Andrew Dillon hasn't missed a lunch, I don't think, in the last 6 years. He's been incredibly supportive, and
fantastic.
I'm most grateful for what the AFL do to help us with that. You can go to chamberlainfoundation.com.au and you can jump on there, click a ticket, and book a ticket when it comes up. So that's probably the two ways, mate, that you can go about doing that. Otherwise, I'll see you at the footy.
And I'll highly encourage everyone to go and check out there's plenty of fantastic recent social media posts from yourself via that account, and of course, as we've mentioned before, the foundation's doing incredible things as well, and it's an unbelievable endeavour what you're doing, and I wish it and yourself nothing but the most success along the way.
Thanks very much, Paul. Mate, have a good night, and as I said, I'll see you when I'm down in Geelong, mate.
Yeah, will do. Cats fans, if you haven't already done so, please make sure to subscribe to The Hoop Show on YouTube, Behind the Play on podcast feeds. Thank you, as always, for your support over the course of the year. Things ended a little bit abruptly for us this year, but I'm sure the Cats will be back, as Ray's touched on, in 2024. I'll sling him a bit of cash on the side, and you can give us a few good calls next year. I kid. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board, and it's been a pleasure to have everyone tuning in for this episode once again. So, Ray, thank you so much, and Cats fans, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.